I'll begin this afternoon with a riddle. Well, really it's a picture of irony. What kind of person asks to see something that they've already seen several times and yet never seen? Now, if you can come up with the answer for that, then you might be better teaching this lesson than I am. Now, women, I will add, before you start answering, I did not just describe your husband looking for something around the house, although I will admit, while I joke about that, it does infuriate me that Melissa can go find something in the refrigerator that I've looked for 15 minutes. That part is kind of annoying. But irony is a person who wants to see something while being able and yet not willing. We'd call this selective blindness, but when you tie that to a spiritual sense, we would call that selective spiritual blindness, which is really the theme of Mark chapter 8, which is where we are this afternoon. And in this chapter, there are two things that unfold that seem to confuse people. One being a statement that Jesus makes, and then a miracle that follows this statement, because this miracle, it seems like it doesn't work the first time, and it leaves people scratching their heads going, well, why did Jesus have to perform a miracle twice? Lord willing, one of those we're going to answer today, one we'll answer in 2 weeks, since our fellowship meal and Devo service is next week. So remember, up to this point, the shift has occurred. Jesus is no longer focusing on public crowds. He's focusing on the 12. The teachings are centered on them, parables centered on them, warnings issued to them. And what Jesus is trying to get the apostles to understand is the reality that the gospel is for everyone. Salvation is open to everyone that comes to the Lord through obedient faith. It's not selective, even though the truth revealed only a few will select. So last week, very importantly, we ended off with Jesus crossing the sea. He was in Decapolis on the east side of the sea. He's going to make the 8-mile trek west across the Sea of Galilee. He's going to come to an area called Dalmanutha, which is right alongside a little podunk town called Magdala, not far from Tiberias. And as soon as he gets there, some old friends will be waiting on Jesus. But this introduces us to the blind men who claim they want to be able to see. So Mark 8, if you look at verse 11, then the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. The good old Pharisees. You know, it's been a while since we've heard from the Pharisees. They haven't been a part of the last few sections that we've looked at because Jesus has been in Gentile territory, and the Pharisees wouldn't dare step foot into Gentile territory. That would make them unclean. But it's funny. Well, it's funny to me. You may not find this interesting. But if they did go into Gentile territory for some reason, they actually had rules and regulations they would follow. And they wore these big cloaks, right? But when you went into Gentile territory, you cinched that cloak up real tight. You kind of put it through your legs and you wrapped it real tight. And that was somehow going to ward off all the evilness of the Gentiles. You constantly wipe the dust off of you because the last thing you can do is bring Gentile dust back to your house. It makes you unclean. We see Jesus' popularity is continuing to spread, which isn't a surprise, because nothing like what Jesus is doing has happened before. There's never been this onslaught of miracles. So when Jesus comes to the west side of the sea, the Pharisees are there and they're fuming and they're trying to get to Jesus. But did you notice the language here? How it says they came to listen to the words of this great teacher? No, it says they came to dispute with him. Whatever he was saying, and what Mark uses is the Greek word suzeteo. And what it is they came to argue. Whatever they could argue. It wasn't just that. Notice the last part. What were they really after? They wanted to see a sign. There it is. You know, every time I think about this, they want to see a sign. I don't know if you remember back to, some of y'all aren't remembering back, wouldn't know it, but the comedian Bill Engvall, you know, his thing was, here's your sign. Anyways. The language here downplays this a little bit. It's not just that they were hoping to see something. The language here is they were demanding to see a sign. If they had this sign, Jesus, You have to show me this sign. And if you show me this sign, then maybe it'll open my eyes. And it sounds good to think there was the possibility. But the question then is, well, what kind of sign would it take to satisfy them? Because let's see what's unfolded so far. God's already spoken down from heaven when Jesus was baptized, said, "This is my Son, and whom my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." If you ask me, I would say that's pretty clear. He made bread and fish out of thin air, bread that was never in the ground, fish never in the sea. Lots of food left over. Demons are cast out around Jesus, but before they're cast out, they would profess Him as the Son of God. "We know who you are, Most High Son of God." Obedient to the very words that the Lord speaks every single time. Nature obeys Him. Wind stops when He says. Sickness flees in His presence. And death is like a power nap when Jesus is around. What kind of sign do they need to believe? Maybe a couple more dead raised. Maybe that would do it. You see, no sign would ever be enough for them. Because any sign they would see would not increase their faith. It would only increase their desire for more signs. Now, listen to how real this gets in our own culture today. Look at the faith sign culture that we have in the world today. I would believe in the Lord, and Nick, I almost guarantee if you, as a preacher, I've heard this. If the Lord would just speak to me, then I would believe. I'd give my life. If He would just tell me something. I want to just pick up the Bible and go, here. He did. It's right here. If I could see a sign from heaven, then I would know. And since I haven't gotten a sign yet that this is what God wants from me, then I guess I'll wait until I do. So the problem is people then just stop and wait. Well, God, if I wake up in the morning and I feel better, that's a sign that I'm supposed to go to work. Unless you're Marshall and work for the government. But he's not even in here.
Not anymore.
Huh?
It's not even more.
Yeah. Lord, if the rain stops, I'll know that's a sign you want me to go to church this Sunday. Now, let's be clear. I say some of these jokingly. Let's be clear. Can God use signs? God is God. Nothing is outside the power. God can do whatever He wants within the power He has, which is everything. But is God limited to the establishment of a person's faith based on signs? No. In fact, we have the greatest sign we ever need. All we got to do is look at Calvary. Because in Calvary we see the sign of God's love. And then we come to understand that a faith built on signs really is a faith lacking from the get-go because it was never established in the foundation. Because that faith based on signs is not really faith at all. It's sight. It's sight-built. A mature faith goes to God's Word for instruction and direction. And so Jesus, knowing all things, I wonder how He feels about this. Verse 12, but He sighed deeply in His spirit. That statement means He was groaning. I mean, that He didn't like what He heard. Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation. Jesus, give us a sign. No sign. Which is odd because several signs had already been given. But what Jesus literally said, if you look at what He actually said, He says, no sign will be given like that which you want to see. I'm not here to wow you. I'm not here to be a puppet. Now, Mark's account paraphrases Jesus' statement. Matthew gives us more of a direct quotation. There is actually one more sign coming that Jesus references, and this brings us to point one of confusion. I told you there's two aspects here that seem to confuse people. One is this sign that's coming that Jesus references. When you look at Matthew 16, verse 4, which is the parallel account to this, you get the quotation of what Jesus says. Verse 4, Jesus says, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. He left them and departed. No sign will be given you except the sign of Jonah. That can be confusing. I can remember years ago I didn't fully understand You hear it and you understand the basis of what's being said. They didn't really fully grasp it. What would be the relevance of a sign like Jonah? Because when he says this, the Pharisees don't respond, the apostles don't respond. It's like he just flies over their head. Here's why Jesus mentioned Jonah as the final sign. Because it is an account the Jews know. Think about how far removed we are, and if I went around here, everyone could tell me who Jonah is. We know the sign of Jonah. We know what Jonah did. Jonah ran from God, swallowed by a big fish, in the belly of the fish for 3 days. Therefore, for 3 days, for all intents and purposes, Jonah's dead. Alright, he dead. But after 3 days, he was resurrected in a sense from the belly of the fish, basically vomited up on the seashore near Nineveh. So Jesus uses that as the illustration. He says, well, just as Jonah was in the fish for 3 days, seemingly dead, Jesus, he'll be in the grave. It'll appear that all hope is lost. He's dead. But after 3 days, the Lord's going to return from the grave as Jonah did from the fish. That's the sign of the deity of God, which is the sign of all signs, by the way. We hear about someone being resurrected in the Bible from the dead, and it seems like it's a common thing. No big deal. It's just resurrected from the dead. Jesus was able to do it like it was nothing. Well, they're not dead. They're just sleeping. Get up. But understand that no dead person had resurrected themselves. And then everyone that was resurrected died again. So this is very different than what we're talking about. Jesus even said it, that no man takes my life. I have the power to lay it down. If I have the power to lay it down, I can raise it up again. Jesus said this long before. So the Pharisees, they're continually asking. It was a repetitive thing that they want a sign. Jesus makes it clear, no sign will be given except Jonah. Jonah is where you can go in your mind. So I want to make sure we're clear on this reference. But we need to ask the question, is it really that big of a deal? They want one more sign. Jesus could do signs like it was nothing. For him, it was nothing. What would one more sign hurt? Go to the grave, raise one more. Heal one more sick. Just do one more thing. Because it wouldn't have mattered. It would not have mattered. In fact, if you think about for a year and a half, Jesus was in Capernaum, around Galilee, in and around Capernaum, and he's doing all these miracles, and they wouldn't believe. So Jesus tells Capernaum, Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom would have believed had they seen what you saw, and you won't believe. It would have never been enough. The atonement of Jesus has always been very direct with the Pharisees, but understand where we are now. All right, now it's changed. The tone now with the Pharisees is turned to judgment. He sees their hearts. He knows their reality. And so listen to this. Because he just teed it up for a teaching moment, right? He gets in the boat and he leaves. He's not teaching. Verse 13. And he left them. Got in the boat and left. And getting into the boat again, departed to the other side. So now it's a reversal. He went from east to west. Now he's west to east, 8-mile trip, done it several times. He's not going to teach the Pharisees. Judgment's already being passed on them. But the lesson is about to get real for the apostles, because while the Pharisees made the choice to choose blindness, the Pharisees that think they can see can't see. They're blind as well. Things haven't become clear yet, and so it will. So verse 14 really is kind of the transition here. From he gets in the boat, now verse 14, it's like it's a completely different account. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread. How did bread come up in the conversation? We're talking about miracles. They forgot to take bread. They did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. So now we shift back in the same context of what's just been said. They want to see a sign. In the boat, all the apostles can see is one loaf of bread. They saw Jesus feed 5,000 with 5 loaves. That's pretty neat. They saw Jesus feed 4,000 with 7 loaves. That's pretty neat. But all I can see now is one loaf. That's a problem. I knew it wouldn't look like it's a loaf of bread, it's like a cracker. This is a problem. What? My goodness, what are we going to, how are we going to eat? It seemed at times as if they had learned nothing. They still don't get it yet. They're looking through worldly eyes, in a worldly mindset. And Jesus kept trying to take it back to the spiritual. It's not about food. It's not about food. In fact, Matthew 4:4, man does not live by bread alone. We don't have any bread. This isn't good. So Jesus is about to educate them once again because the seeing don't understand. Verse 15, then he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Beware of the leaven. Well, leaven is what makes bread rise. So, what is Jesus talking about with bread and with these two groups? Why are the apostles acting and thinking like these two groups? Why is the emphasis always on the physical, the choice to be blind towards the spiritual? And so what Jesus is trying to get them to do is see past this, stop choosing blindness. Jesus is right here. So what is it with the leaven of the Pharisees? Well, we talked about that this morning. Chapter 23 of Matthew is a direct rebuke on the Pharisees, the whitewashed tombs, the holy pretenders, the hypocrites. Their faith is physical, it's outward, it's empty on the inside, it's pretentious. They added to the Word of God, removed the parts they didn't like, it was about position of authority and power, honor and glory. Certainly not what Jesus had in mind. To piggyback off this morning, we do need to be careful here. Every one of us. That the leaven of the Pharisees doesn't get into our hearts as well. Where we lose sight of Jesus and we start seeing self-righteousness. And Jesus said it only takes a little bit of leaven. It doesn't take much. Now, I will add that Matthew's account includes the Sadducees as well for the exact same reason as the Pharisees. Although the Sadducees and Pharisees are an interesting study, we won't get into this because it's getting later in the afternoon and everybody had a big lunch. So I'm not going to get into this. I find this interesting. So because I find it interesting, you have to hear a little bit of it. The Sadducees and the Pharisees were very different on some things. Sadducees were all about materialism. All right, they're the ones running the temple. They want the money, they want the riches, they want the pomp and circumstance. They're about that, which is why Jesus goes into the temple, makes whips, runs about. That's the Sadducees doing this. The Pharisees are the holier than thou. They're the ones that would look down upon the Sadducees because, as Pharisees, we're the ones that really have it figured out. So there's this constant conflict between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. So both of those are mentioned. But then Jesus adds a second group, really a third if you consider them two. He talks about Herod. Now this morning I mentioned the Herodians. But he's talking about Herod, which is the other route. So you've got the leaven of the Pharisees, the self-righteous route. Then you've got the leaven of Herod, this person who had it all, got what he wanted, when he wanted, how he wanted. But really, it's somebody willing to trade away a spiritual inheritance for worldly possessions, thinking too much about the physical and not enough on the spiritual. You see, Christians, we struggle. That's a struggle we face so often. Because one of the problems we have finds its roots really in one of these descriptions. The reality is, you'll see that the apostles are struggling with them both. Listen to this. Let's see if they understand. Maybe their eyes are going to be open as we get into verse 16. I'm sorry, hard for me not to laugh. I read this. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, is it because we have no bread? On the surface, I want to believe this would make anyone stop and say, oh, okay, he's condemning them for what they're doing. What are they doing? And I want to make sure I'm not doing what they're doing. No, it's because we don't have bread. He's upset with me. Can't make a sandwich now. They have seen the interactions for over 2 years now. Well, hang on. What's Herod doing also? Am I doing what Herod's doing? I don't want to be doing that either. They sat at the Lord's feet for 2 years. And when they put their brains together, the best the brain trust can come up with, and their grand conclusion is, Jesus is mad, we don't have bread. I bet that's it. That's why he's talking about leaven. We don't have bread. He's upset. We'll say you see people get hangry. It must be about bread. First off, if Christ was upset about bread, he could have just said bread. Never mind the fact that if Christ is upset about bread, he could have just made bread. He just did it. He uses leaven because it's the starting point. It's the seed that grows the deceitfulness and the emphasis on the physical, saying essentially beware of just the starting point of that in your life. Beware of that. It just had nothing to do with bread. Again, he already said, man shall not live by bread alone. You ever wonder, we're going to verse 17, but you ever wonder as Jesus is saying this, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm frustrated just teaching the way they responded. I wonder if as he's living it, just how frustrated he got about all this. Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Why is it that you still understand? That's the question. And then interestingly, he includes, why is your heart not hardened? Still hardened. Little words make all the difference. Still hardened. It's already in this case, but when he says still hardened, is you've seen enough to break that. Why is it still hardened? Well, what hardened their hearts in the first place? They're Jews like all the rest of them are. They were raised in the same system, the same Pharisaical rule that everything is about the physical. Everything is about them. And all they can think about in this moment is a loaf of bread. But now Jesus gets to the point. Really, verse 18 is where we're going. Because this verse right here, and I hate to even do this because I already know how this is about to go. All right? I need you to remember this verse for 2 weeks. I know. Believe me, I get it. I can see some of the concerned look on your face already. I'll probably read it again in 2 weeks. This is the summary statement Jesus is making that launches him into the miracle that everybody questions. This is what it's about. This verse sets the stage for that miracle. Having eyes, do you not see? Meaning, you have eyes to see, but you don't see. Then all of a sudden he heals the blind man who can't see. I wonder why. Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? They have eyes, they can see, but they don't see. They have ears, they can hear, but they don't listen. Nor do they remember, or else they would have known all this already, which is baffling to me because I don't see how they could not remember. But it didn't sink in clearly. So this is his lesson. 19 through 21. Last verses we're going to look at. When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said to him, 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large basketfuls of fragments did you take up? They said 7. So he said to them, how is it you do not understand? But hang on. Did they miss a question? It kind of seems like they got every one of them right. There were 12 baskets. There were 7 baskets. Good. When I read this reminds me so much of my dad getting on to me about something when I was a kid. Because he would ask me a question. It was a rhetorical question where I think he was trying not to call me like dumb or something, the way I was responding to him. I was answering the question correctly. And I still get in trouble. Well, but I answered the question correctly. But you missed the point. I didn't understand that until I had my own kids. Then I came to understand it later on. But if your eyes were truly open, this is the summation of what Jesus says. If your eyes were truly open, then you would see the reality of what's in front of you. You would see the importance of the spiritual above it all. You would see who I am, and you would stop worrying about something like bread. You stop worrying about the physical and the what you need now. This physical thing you have to be able to hold on to. Spiritual bread is what you need. The problem is they were choosing blindness. I don't know if you saw that title slide. I know it looked kind of odd. Like who chooses blindness? Well, you'd be surprised who chooses blindness. The majority of the world does. And what he says is, stop choosing blindness, choose sight. Well, what kind of sight? Sight in seeing who Jesus is. Don't look to what's right in front of you here and now. Look to heaven. Look for the spiritual things. You have eyes, but you're not seeing. You have ears, you're not listening. And you think about all the people in this world today that are never satisfied with the stuff like bread. It's never enough money. The job's not good enough. The house could be bigger. My clothes could be nicer. My kids could be more well-behaved. And while Jesus, the whole time, is trying to get him to look up. You're missing it. How is it you still don't see? Is his question. And then he shifts everything to spiritual. If we focus on spiritual, then all the rest falls in place. The miracle coming in the next lesson that seems to fail is a direct result of this lesson. You think you see, but you need to see clearly who the Lord is in your own life and be able to answer that question for yourself. Now, I do hope that is something you can answer for yourself. In fact, I'll end with this. I hope that as you leave, you can answer the question, who is Jesus? Are you seeing Jesus clearly with open eyes to understand who he is, how he came, what his ministry was, what his purpose was? That your faith is established in him, not in sight of the physical, but in sight of who he is in the revelation of his word. So for the final time this afternoon, we're going to offer the invitation song here in just a moment. And if you can't answer that question, if you don't feel grounded in the truth of who Jesus is, then I want to encourage you. If you have a need, whatever it may be, whether you've not answered the gospel call, or if you have that need of, I've been focused too much on this, on the stuff, and I've lost sight of who the Lord is in my life. And that happens. But if you have that need to be restored, to be encouraged, to have prayers extended on your behalf, have us help you in whatever way we can, whatever that need may be this afternoon, don't leave carrying it with you. Come as we stand and we sing this invitation song.
Hear the sweet voice of Jesus say, come unto me, I am the way. Hearken the loving call of rain. Come for he loves you so. Only a step, come for he bled for you and I. He's the same loving Savior yet, Jesus the crucified. Jesus, I come to thee. Only a step, comforting land for you and I. Jesus, same love.